Okay, so first things first, I'd just like to say good morning for coming and listening to what we have to talk about today as our clever document delivery solution. For people that don't know me and haven't attended these before, I'm Stuart Stevenson. I'm the head of product for Clever Dynamics. So obviously head the team up, work with the team to create new solutions, changes that people want, keeping abreast of industry requirements, etc. And generally, obviously here as a point of knowledge, point of contact for you guys as well. If you need to reach out on anything, I always say feel free to contact me. That's what I'm here for. So for today, essentially, I'm going to keep it pretty short and simple from an agenda perspective. I'm going to try and focus most of our webinar today on actually showing you the software rather than just talking through slides. Session I'll aim for kind of 45 minutes and obviously allow for any questions as we go through or at the end. I always feel that if you do have something that comes into your mind, either write it into the chat if you want, or feel free to interrupt me. We're a relatively small group and I've kind of allowed for people to ask the question at the point that it becomes relevant. And I think primarily, what we're going to do is obviously look at the features within the product, Clever Document Delivery, and look at certain things that we believe set it apart from standard Business Central or some of the alternative products that are available today, and kind of fill the gaps for people in their kind of business requirements. So, essentially, why Clever Document Delivery? I think it's fair to say that standard Business Central will give you that ability to email a PDF to a customer or a purchase order to a supplier. And even me myself, I'm very much customer focused. So I would argue the case that for a small business that wants to send a few standard documents to customers each and every day, but a handful, then it probably does that job well enough. But essentially, Clever Document Delivery for me has a few core advantages that we'll show you guys today. And a quote that we had from one of our customers was the fact that every document across their business was automatically sent to the right person in the right format and with the right attachment on the right schedule, which kind of it encompasses the kind of goal, I guess, of the solution. For myself, key points that I pick up on is the fact that because of the automation, Clever Document Delivery can automate the process rather than requiring users to click buttons to trigger such document sending. The other thing that document delivery caters for is that one size does not fit all. There are different requirements for different customers and styles based on dynamic data as well, depending on what you're doing, where standard obviously has kind of document layouts at a customer level, but that's about it. I think as well, document delivery provides some additional kind of attachment capabilities, allowing you to merge multiple documents together, add watermarks or conditionally include certain attachments when you're sending, an invoice or a quote or an order. And we'll see some of that today as well. And then the key for me is that we've tried to enable the document delivery solution across Business Central to different processes. So not just sending a sales order or a purchase order, but we support other things such as the service module and also things like remittance advice going out when you're making a payment to a vendor, or customer statements according to schedules that you can predefine and set up. And then I think with the audit perspective, obviously you have an outbox with standard Business Central, but Clever Document Delivery has a document log where you can also see if there were any problems and the reason for any problems and a resend. So you've got that full trace, and they're associated to documents in the system as well, so you can see how those things link together and exactly when somebody sent documents out. So I have heard and even talked to Microsoft, and I do know that they will be making improvements later this year to the standard capabilities. So the gap will essentially close a little bit. I have no doubt about that. But today, really, I hope that I'll show you, a few things that, when and they're needed, make document delivery still very relevant and powerful for those customers in, areas that the gaps will not close, I don't believe. And finally, before I jump into the demo, I'd just like to point out really that I'm not going to, walk you guys through the configuration installation of the app. That would be quite boring, I think. But I did just want to mention that for the app and for many of our other apps, we do have an assisted setup wizard. So after installation, that will allow you to essentially run a default configuration package that will implement, the baseline for pretty much all of what I'll be using today. So essentially that does mean that the things I will show you, you can get close to running this solution in a matter of minutes, essentially, once it's installed. So let's now jump over to Business Central, and I'll start to show you some of the capabilities that we have. As I did say at the start, if you do have any questions as we're going through, feel free to jump in to ask me them or put them on the chat and we can go through them at the end. So I'm going to start off really, really simple. I'm going to go to a sales order and I'm just going to essentially produce or create a sales order for a customer, doing nothing more than adding a simple item to the order. And we'll just wait for Business Central to kick in. Here we are. So you'll see here, this is no different to what anybody would do. We've created an order, we put a line to it, and once we are essentially ready for that order to be processed and to be confirmed by the customer, we can essentially just come and release the document. Okay, so from a user's perspective, I'm not thinking about sending a document there. As a business, what I've done is I've set the rules up to decide when I should be sending documents automatically. And what will happen is that document, and you'll have seen the screen pop up and process something, but it'll pop essentially into my inbox, and I'll just open the email that I've just received. So here we are, I've got an order confirmation. It's got some narrative on it that I've fed from the system, and I've got an attachment, which is just my standard order confirmation. Okay, so that's the standard document in Business Central. But again, it comes to that fact that I've not had to actually think about sending that to my customer. I've put the rule inside of the system that mean that is just part of the business process. And I think what we should do is just back in, we'll just have a look at how that worked. Okay, and it was quite simple. So what we have within document delivery setup, okay, open that here, are some rules that let me control when I send documents automatically. So you can see that the only one I've got set up, which is what I just used in that demonstration, was that I have a sales order being sent essentially. I can queue it, so if I do want to have a job queue there and send all documents every half an hour, I can do that. But in my case, I just said send, and that means that when I release that document, it will send. We have similar things obviously for posting invoices, and that's at the point of posting, or maybe a remittance at the point of posting. Again, we can do that type of thing. I won't go through all of the setup here. I'll just wanted to point out the things that were relevant and just obviously highlight that we can then trigger rules for other types of documents as well. But what we can also do is have a look at our document types. Now, a document delivery document type essentially is the thing that is controlling what we send to a customer based on the type of document we are handling. So in our case there, we've got a sales order confirmation. And when I said earlier about the configuration package and being up and running in minutes, these are all created through the assisted setup wizard from a baseline, essentially. So let's just open one of these. And again, I won't go into all of the detail here. We will build upon certain things as we go through today's session as well with further information. But really, a document type is bound to a table. So in our case, the sales header table and a order document type. So that tells it when it's relevant. And then we can do certain things. We can control what email accounts we use to send this document from. So obviously, you could have different accounts being used depending on the type of document. So your invoices might come from a finance email address, for instance, or you can just have a default, which is how I've got it working today. So we can set subjects, we can also control printing if we need to. But furthermore, we can edit the email body. So again, this is where we saw that message, and we can add certain things to that, such as images, etc., which we'll see a little bit later. So this is quite a simple one. And I'm not going to make it any more complex than that. And then finally, on the sort of attachment side for now, you can see that what it's done, it's basically said, what do I need to attach to these emails when I'm sending? Okay, and in this case, it was just our basic sales order confirmation report. So I'm not going to go any more detail. I'll show you some more complex scenarios a little bit later. But for now, what we're going to do is just jump onto another quick demo. This time we're going to have a look at customer statements. So let's just have a little look on a customer, for instance, and I'll take any customer, it doesn't really matter. So with our customer statement functionality, we can send manually, which I'll do shortly, but we can also set a frequency. So if we were, wanting to send a customer a statement every week, or if it's every month, we can do that by assigning one of these frequency codes. And on the frequency code, we can obviously define the rules for how often it gets sent, so 7 days here, and we can control basically when we need to first send it, and the system will update the next send. So this case here, I haven't run the job, and I won't run the job today, but essentially it will just collect all customers that need to have a statement sent to them according to that schedule. And obviously you could run that, every single day if you like, and it will just collect the relevant customers, and without anybody doing anything, it will send them an email. Now, what I'll just do here, however, is I'll just select a couple of customers. And on this one here, what we will have is a send email doc delivery option. And that option essentially will be consistent across the system. So if I do a manual send from anywhere, it will always be called the same thing. And I could select one or more. So in this case, I've selected a couple of customers, and you can see it's going away there, generating some information essentially, and that will create the emails. It will add the attachments to it of their statements, and again it will then just send the email to the relevant customer's email address as well. Now, I didn't show you a little bit earlier, but you can also define a default value, essentially, or a custom value. So if I just pop back to the document type screen, what you could do, and I'll find this statement as an example, although it doesn't really matter which one I chose. You can just see here that we're attaching the standard sales statement down the bottom. Again, it will have the body, etc. But we can also say for certain customers for this document type, for instance, we can define custom values. So if your customer says, I want to, and in fact, let me just fill in the customer details, that would help me. But I could say for customer 10,000, we actually, for the to email address, we might send it to, the the finance team rather than the standard email address from the customer record. So you can do this for all of the different document types, ensuring that the information goes to the right person. And this is how you can do that quite simply. I'll just jump back out of that one, and essentially as well back in my inbox, what we'll find is that I've got an email that's been sent to each of my customers, and it's got their names on it, for instance, and we've got the different customer statements. Okay, so that's just it running for multiple records at the same time, producing different information, going to different people. Bear in mind, and you can do this as well when you're testing, there was a simple flag on the document delivery setup that puts this into test mode. Hence, they're all coming to my email address. Okay. So let's just jump back again. So pretty simple, and the fact is, obviously, this from a user perspective should be very simple. From a setup perspective, obviously, we try and keep it as simple as it can be, but we can actually turn up the heat a little bit for me. As I mentioned at the start, we have Business Central being able to, potentially use different document layouts of reports and so on for a different customer when sending a sales order. But what we've built within document delivery is a concept that we call document styles. So a document style will enable us to send the same type of document, such as a sales order confirmation or a purchase order, but with different layouts that are defined on a data basis. Okay, so it's dynamic. So it could be a certain dimension code on the sales order that's driving a different document type and style to be used. Essentially, the key difference for us is it's the data that is driving the selection of what document style we're going to use, and potentially the different email formatting or who it's sent from, etc., rather than a static setup that's defined against a customer. And our first use case of this, really, and where it came from, was a concept where we had a user that had a single Business Central company, but they were handling multiple different brands. Now, these brands weren't segregated by their customers. The customers were actually buying from them across the brands. So it's not something you can just say this customer gets this template and the other customer gets the other template. So that's why we kind of extended out the solution to be flexible based on data. So it solved that kind of need, but also many others. So for me, and in our demo today, I'm just going to keep it very simple, and I'm going to use sales order against a different customer. So before we used the customer 10,000, and this time I'm going to just create a new order, and I'm going to use customer 30,000, and I'll just assign the same item. Values here don't really matter for what I'm showing you, but one thing I will point out that you might have noticed here on the top right is that we've had a style code that's been populated there, and it's therefore chosen a different document type code. Okay, so let me again just do the standard process of release. So again, the user is not doing anything different to what that user did in my first scenario of sending a sales order. It's exactly the same process as far as they're concerned, but because of the rules in the system, something different is essentially going to happen. I'm just waiting for my email to pop through. Okay, just give it a second. Always goes slow when you least want it to. Let me just pick up one. So let's just have a little look at this email, one from yesterday, but it'll show what will happen. Essentially, I've now run the same process, but here what you'll notice is that I've got different text on the body. So you can now see it says, thanks for your vortex order, please review the terms and conditions. And we've also got an image here. Now, if I open it's just come through, ironically. But let me just open this document as well. So here we've got, a document and I've got some terms and conditions. Okay, so same sales order confirmation, some conditions attached, a reference to, let me just close that one, and a reference, for that user to confirm that they, read the terms and conditions and make sure they notify us of any problems. Okay, so let's now let me just switch back into here. So let's just switch back here. Now, from the perspective of what actually happened there, was that the system found a different style code and therefore the brand. So how did that work? Well, let's come back to our document types, and you get the story by now that these document types are driving essentially what's happening. But if we open up this one here called SO brand 1, on the surface, it's obviously the same kind of look and feel. It has a bit of different data, and the data that we have is this style code over here. So this lets you, and your customers essentially set up the different style codes that mean, how can you, brand things differently or include different information for certain types of customers, and tie that information together through the process. And I think that's the important thing as well, that we've basically enabled it to inherit from a source document through posting processes, etc. So that style code on the sales order confirmation, or the sales order, sorry, will flow through to a posted sales invoice. And if you therefore have a document type linked to the style code for an invoice, you make sure you get a consistent, level of branding or associated information going to those customers. Now, how did it work? Essentially, is quite simple. We have what we call our document type assignments. And this here is where we then simply use the information that we've got available on the table or the attributes, and we can apply filters in here just like we could to filtering a list in Business Central that let us control what document type and therefore style code actually gets associated to that document that we are processing. Okay. And that's how simple it is, really. Data driving the selection of a document type, and then our document type being set up differently. If we look at the email body for this one, you can now see that this is where, for our Vortex brand, essentially, that I'm adding, certain different information than existed for that base document type that I used previously. Okay, so let's just jump back here. So we've done a couple of different things, one which is pretty basic and I think essentially could be covered with standard Business Central. We kind of up the game a little bit with our style codes, which can't be done with Business Central and can be rather powerful used in the right way. But let's actually now move on a little bit to looking at a few more complexities. So and just build on the picture and look at this, how the solution can add more value to us. And I want to do that with some basic document attachments. Okay, and actually, you obviously saw the email from me sending this particular style of document out of the system, and I referred in that body to reading the terms and conditions. Now, essentially, if we scroll down here, you'll notice on the attachment we sent, we had those terms and conditions within the same PDF for the sales order confirmation. And that was actually pretty simple to do. So what we have in document delivery are what we call predefined attachments, essentially. And here we can see that we can then add onto our attachments subpage here the fact that we're going to send an attachment and what that attachment code actually is. So this is a list of attachments that we have in Business Central as part of document delivery. And let's just have a brief look at these. So you can see here, I've got my terms attachment, and all I do really here is upload, a PDF or a document to this, and that can then be used by the solution. And we've got another couple of attachments there, which we'll look at in a minute as well. But that's it in its simplest form. I will say that if anybody uses our document links solution, we can use document links, and that means that we don't have to store files essentially inside of the database, but we can then use SharePoint or Azure Blob Storage, for instance, and we can tie the two together. I won't go into that today because it obviously goes over into the other product, but just to mention that we can also do this in a much more efficient manner as well using the other application. But for now, all I've done is obviously added some attachments here that get set up in this screen, and then we can use them in this attachment code. Now, the other thing that we can do is to decide how we process our attachments. So on the right-hand side here, we have this file processing type. And you can see from our report, there's no processing. It generates the report and attaches it. But for our terms and conditions, we actually had that added, to the order confirmation report. And we did that simply by saying we wanted to merge the document. So we've got some processing that can also go on during this process. And that means that when I choose to merge, it will basically merge this one to the sequence before. So that's why we have the sequence numbers. You can also do things like, watermarking as well. So we've used that before. Maybe on a quote, you might put a draft kind of watermark onto a document. We can do that. We've also used it when we've had customers that have pre-printed stationery and wanted to keep that look and feel and make sure that to a customer it was exactly the same, but did not want to carry on buying pre-printed stationery to then have to print onto that and to send it to customers, scanning it in or sending it in the post. So we've used it to actually embed a scan of the pre-printed stationery, create that as a PDF, and then use it as a watermark, and it looks exactly the same. So it can be quite powerful when used in different ways. But in this case here, all we have was a standard PDF attachment being embedded into that sales order confirmation. But we can do more essentially with attachments. And let's just look at the first example of what we can do. So I want to take this into a kind of a quoting world where I'm going to prepare a quote for a customer, and I'm going to put some items onto that, and I'm going to provide them with additional information for those items. So as we saw on our attachments list, I had a couple of specs that were on there, and essentially what we can do is we can associate the attachments. I'll just scroll down. So we can associate an attachment code to an item. So for my wireless headphones, I'm essentially saying that has the spec headphones, essentially attachment code, which is a product specification. And my second item, my power bank, has its own specification document. So let's go and add those items to a sales quote. So standard process, obviously. Just going to put in my customer number, and I'm going to choose my to products. So I'll just add one of each here. And again, all I'm doing is a standard process where I can prepare this document. Now this time I haven't got it set to auto send, but if I just run this from the menu, so as I said earlier, it always is the same captioned menu option here. So I'm just going to use the send email document delivery. And this is obviously going to send the sales quote to my customer. Just wait for my email to come in. In fact, I'll just open this here. So on this email, I've now got essentially a standard email body that obviously I set up in the document type. I've got the quote, but I've actually got alongside the quote product specifications. Okay, so essentially here, I'm now able to send the product spec for the wireless headphones and the product spec for my power bank as part of that email. Okay, and I could have obviously, as I did with the terms and conditions, I could have merged them in, but actually in this case, I didn't do any processing on the document itself. I simply said just to attach them. So as with the other types of document that we've looked at, let's just pop back to our document type and take a look at how that actually worked. So this time, if we scroll down to our attachments, we can see it's the same as before in essence, sequence number 2, it's an attachment, and I've got the attachment code, but realize that isn't an attachment code that exists in my attachment lists. So where we see the attach with the couple of square braces around it, that is almost like a variable, a dynamic value that we can control when we're actually running the document delivery process. Okay, and these codes, these values, link to our fields below. And this is also how earlier I was able to have different values for the who I'm going to send emails to, etc. Okay, so we've got some that come out of the box, this being one of them, with our configuration packages. You can add more to it, but the question probably is, well, how did I get the system to send the specific attachments that were linked to each of the individual items within this using this variable? And this is where we start to add a little bit of more kind of capability and potential complexity, but finitely it's something you learn to use, which is our linked table functionality. So our linked tables let us go from the kind of top level table, our source, so our table 36 for our quote, to other associated information. So let me just take a brief look through here and show you what I mean. And I'm just going to focus on the last two actually. So here we can see the link number 5 is actually table number 37. It's our sales lines. Okay, so what we're saying is when we're processing our sales quote, we want to go and get the lines that are associated with the header. And so we specify our table, and here at the bottom we specify how they're linked. And it's quite simple, and you'll probably be used to these as Business Central kind of filter links between those tables as relationships. But what we're saying is that our document type basically will be linked to our primary table field number 1, which is the document type. Yeah, so we're just linking the document type from the header to the lines, and also we're just linking the document number to our number of our sales lines. So we then get all of the lines that belong to our quote. Okay. Now there also what I've done is I've added a hard literal filter as well on the type field of the sales line to say, I only want records that are item type. Okay, so now, if you imagine we're running the sales order quote, if it's got any, comment lines or GL account lines, it won't include them. Okay, because I don't need those within my set of linked records. And here what we're saying at the top, this multi-level flag means that for each record, it will go through each one, and it will also then process any associated linked tables. And our last linked table on here is the item, because I want to obviously get that attachment code from the item table, from each of the records, for the items that are associated with each sales line. So my link at the bottom will actually be a link on the field number 1, obviously, which is, let me scroll to the left, is our number, so our item number. And I'm going to link it again to a field, but this time I'm going to link it to the link table number 5. So I'm now able to get down 2 levels from the sales quote header through the lines, traverse each of those lines, and link to the item. And I'm obviously just going to link on the number field from the sales line to the number field of my item record. Okay, so for every document I process, it will process each of those linked tables, it will grab the records, and it will go through and collect information that I can use for my fields. Okay, so the final part there is to say, well, how does my attach variable almost get the attachment code from the item record? And that's on this little button called field lines. So at this point here, we simply say, what is our source for this bit of data? And our source is the link table. Okay, so you can see here we can use different information, but in my case we're using link table, we're using the item table, and we want the attachment code field. And that's how at runtime it was able to then go through from the quote through the lines to each item to pick up the attachment code from every item. And the final part there, bringing it back, was to then say, let's use the attachment field for our attachment code value. Okay, so that's the simple case, or not so simple, but hopefully it's kind of understood once I've gone through it. You get used to these things when you use them. That's kind of how we've managed to go and get those physical attachments from their items into our document type and send it for each and every email. Now, the last one I wanted to show you, which is also based on the link table functionality, is slightly different, but instead of using attachments, we're going to produce different documents. So my example here is that if we come to some standard functionality in Business Centrals for reminders, okay, now I've created reminders for my customers, and as standard I can send them a report which will say, yep, you're overdue by this much money, and it's these invoices, for instance, this is how it's made up. But often customers potentially will obviously dispute things. It might be why they haven't paid them in the first place. So let me just come along, and I'm just going to do exactly the same thing as I've done previously. I'm just going to send this issued reminder via document delivery. Okay, so again, I've done nothing different from a user perspective, but in this scenario, what I actually want to do is that I want to provide the customers not only with this reminder document and saying, you owe us X amount because of, this invoice and this additional fee that I'm adding, but what I want to do is I actually want to give them the detail of how that overdue balance was come. So I want to give them the invoices. And that means that they can't say they haven't had the invoices or they don't know about them, because they now have them. And essentially, if I just open up the email that's just come into my inbox, what you now see is that that customer has the standard reminder that they would get with Business Central, but they also get each of those invoices that were included on that reminder. So this isn't sending an attachment, this is sending a posted sales invoice, whatever sales invoice that you have set up or your customer has set up, it will basically include a copy of each of those. So let's just briefly again, because you've kind of got the picture of how these things are working, but let's just go back to document types for our issued reminders this time. And in this instance, we're going to start with the linked tables because this is what drives a lot of this behavior. And, hopefully now you're seeing that in this case, what I've got is another couple of tables. I'm now going to the reminder lines. Again, I'm ticking the multi-level to say that I've also got some potential other information that I need to process from each of these lines. And I've got just my links set up. We'll, go over or gloss over them a little bit because it works in exactly the same way as we saw for our sales quote line. And then our next link table is our sales invoice header. So for each of the reminder lines, we're then getting down to the sales invoice header record for each of those lines that are marked as invoices. Okay, so we have our links set up. And then on our attachments again, which as you can see is a common theme if we're wanting to add more, we have more attachments. But this time, our attachment type is not an attachment, it's a report. Okay, so we are running a standard sales invoice report within the issued reminder document type. Now, the reports normally that run will be based on our top level tables. So in this case, issued reminders. But what we can do is we can tell a report at the attachment level that it needs to use a different source. So if I just click on the attachment card, what you can see in the report section is that we've actually got, a set of filters. And the filter here for the report source gives me the ability to link the source of the report to a link table. Yeah. So I'm saying that the source of the report is link table number 6, which is our sales invoice header. And that's how I was able to then run each sales invoice header from the actual record information from our linked table. You can see things on here, which I won't go into great detail, but we can control, how this information is generated, different types of, attachments that we want to use. We can use different layouts if we want to on these attachments. And we can also say it's optional. So if there is no data, for instance, if it couldn't find a document, maybe you had open imbalances that were part of an issued reminder, then essentially it wouldn't just fall over, it would just bypass that particular attachment sending. So this here is quite powerful. Obviously it could be used in the case of sending, a remittance to a supplier, listing the invoices that you've paid them for. It could be used for a customer statement to provide the sales invoices that form their balance, or even credit memos. It can do both things as it's going through. So it's quite a powerful thing, simple in context, quite abstract in setup as you've seen. But once you kind of get to know how it works and ties together, you can find many different uses essentially for this functionality. And then lastly, for the demo, really just to kind of round things off, I mentioned at the start, obviously we have a kind of audit trail, and this is just stored in our document delivery log. So you can see a record of each and every time that a user's sending information out of the system. So you can see all of the ones that we've done today, and you can see if they've been processed. If they're not processed, you can also see any particular problems that there might have been with sending a document, so you kind of know whether it left Business Central successfully or not. And you can see any attachments and open documents to see what version was sent at that point in time. If you need to, you can also, go and fix obviously any associated data errors, and you can process them from this screen if needs be. The only things I didn't touch on today really were the job queues that we have available. So you can just queue documents as a default and send them in batches at the times that suit the business. And obviously customer statements, we didn't see, but there are job queues that handle the automation of sending customer statements. So with that, that's kind of the demo today. So essentially, what did we see? We saw some of the simple triggers that allow us to send information from Business Central, upon release or processing of business documents. And I think the key thing there is, these are set up when you implement the solution for a customer to become part of a business process rather than the action of the user, which, as we all know, can be a little bit inconsistent at times. We also saw some of the customer statement kind of set up to make sure that we can define rules for how we send those. And as I said just a minute ago, we can put those on job queues to make sure that, again, they happen without users needing to even know about them happening. In terms of what we send from the system, obviously you saw the email editor, and the fact is you can edit that using rich text formatting. You can add images, tables. You can use those field values to essentially do things like even putting in the username of the person that's triggered the sending. So we can do all sorts of things there that essentially mean that you can give a professional look and feel to the documents you're sending without any external tools. And that includes obviously being able to steer the people that you send each type of document to make sure that it goes to the right person. We also saw, our document styles being used that give us more flexible output of different layouts and even different messaging within the emails that we're sending, and that's essentially different from standard. Standard, obviously, you define a document or a report layout, but here we are controlling that through the data that is being included on documents at runtime. Okay, we also saw the static attachments that we were sending, and also that the dynamic attachments that we were also driving again from data rather than fixed values. I didn't show you, but actually in terms of those attachments, you can also set up periods of time for when they're relevant. So use cases we've had for that is people that want to send out price lists, for instance, alongside an order or quotes. And essentially, obviously, price lists change over time. And that means you're able to, set filter criteria or starting date times and ending dates that ensure that, you don't send, for instance, the current price list when you know that the new price list is coming into play tomorrow. So you can set up rules that, again, the users don't have to know anything about, the business can control, and the users are doing the same thing that they're always doing. They're just sending out a sales quote, for instance, but the system's picking up the right attachment to send at the right point in time. And obviously we can, we saw that we had the PDFs that we were generating, and I did highlight, obviously you can use different styles, so you could have, or different formats, sorry, so you could send it as a Word or an Excel, depending on the type of data that it is. And we saw that a lot of these things were also controlled through our ability to, link information together through those linked table relationships, which hopefully you'll agree are quite powerful and open up a few different opportunities. And then finally, we had a look at the sort of controls that we have, or sort of that audit trail. You didn't see all of what document delivery could do today, so just a few things maybe to mention that we didn't see were the ability that we can add password control to our documents. So if a customer says, this must always be, sent with a password because not everybody should be able to open it, we can do that. Other things we have are things like the ability to say that customers do not want to have documents sent to them with document delivery. So we can put that on, and where that's applicable, we can also control that when we process a sales invoice for them, for instance, that it goes to a printer rather than being sent automatically via an email. So we can do those kinds of things. And within the sort of the document sending engine, it also has some duplicate prevention as well. So if you haven't changed a document and the user presses it and the customer says they haven't got it, but then they press it again, for instance, it doesn't create duplicates in the log. It will go and find the one that's not processed in the log, or potentially report back to the user that there's actually a problem that means it can't be sent. And again, you saw the audit log, which stays there. There are cleanup routines as well, data retention policies that you can set against the document delivery log as well, so it doesn't grow too big. And obviously that means that you can control the period of time that you want to keep the audit for. So really very briefly now, just to wrap up, essentially document delivery is a solution that with the assisted setup wizard, you can, set up within minutes. I would encourage you, if you haven't done so already, go and put it in a sandbox, follow the assisted setup wizard. You will get lots of those, or you'll get all of the document types apart from the few that I've customized, set up, ready to go. Put it into test mode, set your email address, start trying it. Essentially, it will work out of the box. Highlight the point of automation, essentially, and I think that's critical. And I've said it a few times, but what we're really about is implementing business process really, and taking away the potential for inconsistencies or people working in different ways. So setting up this document delivery with Business Central to work how you want it to send the right emails at the right point in time, is done through setup rather than a person, remembering to press the send email button. And then some of the last scenarios, I think some might have got a little bit complex. I run through these things like they're quite simple. I guess that's just because of familiarity, essentially. But once you do get used to how these things tie together, it is relatively simple to handle real world scenarios that can become a little bit complex, as I showed you a couple of examples. And with that, the demo is done, the slides are finished, and any questions, just answer, just talk. Bernd, I can see you've got your hand up.
Thanks for introducing and giving us an overview for your module. Just a question about availability. Is it only available for cloud solutions or also on-prem? And if on-prem, for which versions?
So obviously cloud is always our preference because it's easier to manage and maintain, but actually as a partner of Clever Dynamics, you do get access to on-prem versions of pretty much all of our applications, and document delivery is one. In terms of how far it goes back, it will probably go back for each version, essentially, of Business Central for, let's say the last 4 or 5 years. So it goes back quite a while. Now, the only thing there, Bernd, is that we develop, obviously, the new features for the latest version.
Okay.
So a lot of what I've shown you, I think, will be applicable to versions of, even 2 or 3 years, but I wouldn't guarantee it. So obviously we have Microsoft releasing their new versions.
But there's an on-prem version, and not only for the actual version, also for the last 2 versions, as Microsoft wants to support you.
That's right. If I just actually open up my browser again, let me just show you. In fact, I'll open up my other browser session. So as a partner of Clever Dynamics, basically you get access to what we call our Clever Drive. Okay, and you'll see here's all of the kind of versions of Business Central, and within each of these folders, essentially we have all of the app. So you can see here, for instance, the document delivery version, and it'll tell you what version it is, in accordance with obviously the Business Central version. And then you can go and look at something like our docs site, and in here, obviously, we'll have the change logs. So you can come down here and you can see what features were released at what version. What we try and do is we try to actually, for ourselves as much as anything, we try to deploy to the earliest version that gives us the latest capabilities, if you see what I mean, from a Business Central perspective. So even now on a Business Central, 28, if we can implement all of our functionality and not have it break on Business Central 28 because of what Microsoft might have done, you might find that in the Business Central 26 folder is the very latest version of an app. Because unless we have to go up to the next version, we would prefer a version that is compatible with current version, last version, and one before if we can.
I know this, yes.
Yeah.
Another question, is this only pure PDF, or in Germany we do have the scenario that we have to merge XML informations for sending e-invoice details and on technical side to make a electronic data interchange. Is this also a scenario for you, or is it always the print of the Business Central report?
Yeah, so it's not one we come across. Obviously, the reports that you send, so it would probably depend how you're creating that, but all we can do is generate reports essentially. Now, if your report object was then something that generated in XML, for instance, what essentially will happen there, Bern, is it will run the report you tell it to run with the data source. So if that was generating a different type of information, if it was triggered from a report, fine. If it was triggered as part of a code unit, for instance, then it wouldn't work because it wouldn't be able to run the code unit with the data source. But if that report ran something else to generate that data, it might do it. I've not done it, so don't hold it as gospel, but it is possible because all it's doing is running a report. If that was a processing only report that did something and took values and passed them through.
It's a special data containing container in the PDF. So okay, but I know that's from my side. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Any questions from anybody else?
No, good, thank you.
Okay, fine. Well, as I said at the start, I'll say it again. Thank you all for coming and listening to what I've had to say. I do hope that there was some valuable information. If you do have any questions afterwards, feel free to reach out to me. Obviously, the session, Lauren will send out a recording to it as well, so you can listen back. But I'm here to support you guys as partners as well across not only document delivery but any other product. So if you want, feel free to reach out to me and we can talk about anything Clever Dynamics. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you. Cheers.